Greetings, diners, and good afternoon from Alaska and afternoon in Seattle, Washington, and evening in Firenze, Italy. And I have three good friends with me, fellow collapsniks and bloggers who have been we have been known each other and done videos for many years on topics that were of interest at the time. And the topic for today is coronavirus. Okay? And these three folks that I'm talking to are all in hotbeds at one degree of level of infections or another. And for myself, here in Alaska, 44 states have a case of, at least one case of coronavirus. Alaska still has a goose egg, 0. All right? So if you want to move somewhere, come to the last great frontier.
You don't invite anybody there.
Yeah, well, even if we did, most people don't want to come. So anyway, we're going to get started in a minute, but as is my usual for these shows, I always fix a meal. And for today, in honor of the Italians who are suffering the most right now, well, after the Chinese, we are having an Italian meal. And I have here, and you'll see a picture of it at the beginning, okay? Spaghetti and meatballs, all right? Typical Italian fare. And sausage, Italian sausage. And then pizza, all right? A fresh augmented pizza with extra sauce, extra cheese, and my favorite topping, mushrooms, all right? I don't know what these guys like, but, you know, too bad. Next time they can tell me and I'll divide it up. I'll make a slice of each. And to drink, Corona beer. See guys? Corona beer. Okay. And then Alaska water. Okay, glacial spring water, the best water in the world. Okay? And plenty of it, because those glaciers are going to take a while to melt. And then, what do you have with an Italian meal, right? Bottle of red, bottle of white. It all depends upon your appetite. Okay? Got a little bottle of red wine, and a little bottle of white wine. Okay? Plenty to drink. All right. So that's our meal for the day that we will have. Well, or I will have, but I'll actually eat it after this, after our discussion. And let me just introduce everybody as they appear on my screen now. In the picture on the left of my screen, well, it's on the right of the screen, but to my left, is K-Dog, who runs the blog Chasing the Squirrel, and has I think he's written something recently. He'll tell us about it later. And he's a software engineer, or actually, he's just an engineer, IT engineer, hardware, software, whatever. And has worked in the Computer Museum in Seattle for the last few years, and now is between jobs. So he does not have to leave the house, okay, right now, which is good timing, okay. And then moving on the top of the screen to my right is George Mobus, and George is Professor Emeritus at the University of Washington in Seattle, and what?
Tacoma.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tacoma. And he has written many books on system science, and a major textbook on that subject. When I first met him, he was busy writing it. He's always busy writing something. And he also is in Seattle. So Seattle is here in the United States probably the most affected by coronavirus, although New York City is catching up, and New York State in general is catching up to Seattle in terms of numbers and the effects that have been ongoing. And then moving down from there is another old friend, another professor of physical science at the University of Firenze in Italy, and his name is Ugo Bardi, and he also has fame in the collapse field, having been part of the Club of Rome, which produced the 1972 Limits to Growth. 72, correct? Hugo?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
See, I got a decent memory stuff. And he's living in where the hotbed of coronavirus in Europe, which is Italy, right now. And they have the most stringent controls being placed on them and so forth. So we're going to hear about that. All right. So let's go and start with Keith, or K-Dong. Keith, you want to tell us what's going on there, how you're handling it, and what you've seen so far?
Well, for me, it hasn't had a big impact yet because I've been making just other choices with my life. I can go around, I can, go to a store into a big crowd, or I might just, do something else. And so for the time being, all the other else's thing to do are providing, the space and the time to not make me really miss anything yet. I really don't like big crowds, so it's not where I, like to go anyway. You can get out and take a little drive and look at the nice greenery and fill up the gas tank and feel guilty about, burning the CO2, filling up the, all that stuff. But, I'm able to pretty much just avoid, foolish exposure. Now, I'm somewhat fatalistic, though. I think most people are going to get it. From what I learned about these sorts of things, from my little bit of research, these things run their course, and there's basically no way around it. All we can do is slow it down. But eventually, enough people get the disease, enough people recover, they have an immunity, and therefore new cases can't infect. The ratio of cases that they can affect falls below 1, and then it becomes history.
Right.
But that happens after, say, 60% of the people in a region get it. And this thing's worldwide. And, I think it's gotten into the people who live paycheck to paycheck, who don't have time off from work if they have a job to go to, and they're not in a position to say do the right thing all the time. They have to worry about their next meal, or basic stuff. And so we're not like China. We can't control things the way they could. They managed to stop new cases and
so they say,
get through it more quickly. But that's enough from me. That's just, if you wanted where I'm coming from with this. Yeah, I'll talk more, but I'll let these guys chime in.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to George, who's also in Seattle, and is self-sequestering. He's at home and staying at home most of the time. So he's like me now. Okay. Which I do all the time. I live that way. So George, tell us how things are going for you. What's happening at the university that you know of? The students, and are they still holding classes, etc.?
Yeah, the university has closed down the campus to normal classes, so everything that can go online will go online. I'm not affected by that simply because I'm retired.
Right.
But basically, I still communicate. The dean of the school and I are good friends, and so he's been keeping me posted on the difficulties they've been experiencing. The Seattle schools have been, the K-12 schools have been shut down. Basically, it's not as much of a lockdown as in Italy, but it's getting there. The governor of the state recently declared that the three counties, Snohomish, King, and Pierce, which is where I live, are in no large crowds, nothing above, I don't know if it's 250 or greater.
It seems pretty arbitrary. The arbitrary. Where do they get a 250? You know,
250. Where do politicians get any of their numbers? That's really
Pull it out your ass.
Good point.
And
the stadiums are shut down. The games have been canceled. The only effect that has on me is that in a couple of weeks, my wife and I were supposed to go to a concert group that does covers of ABBA. So don't judge me, please.
we'll say that was your wife's choice, okay?
Really, indeed it was. I appreciate ABBA. Just anyway.
It's a wise choice.
So basically, just staying at home until or unless we need some groceries, and then going out to the grocery store, making my way carefully through the aisles and avoiding people as much as possible, using the sterilized wipe or whatever they call them, on my hands as much as on the basket. So that's kind of where it is. I am doing this because I'm in the one of the highest risk categories. Not only over 60, I'm over 70, and I have an extremely compromised immune system. So, if possible, I would like to avoid the. But I tend to agree with Keith. I think the way the epidemiology suggests is most people are going to get some version of this. I can only hope that I've been treating my immune system for the diseases well enough that I can get through without croaking.
Yeah,
Still
I
a good
think we're all
idea to
hoping.
slow it down, but
And
to
then
do that
it,
without stopping life is the question.
yeah, if you don't get it too soon, I mean, they're going to come up with A, treatment, and B, a vaccine. I mean, those things will come down the pipe, but it's going to take several months before before they do, and then to distribute them widely and so forth, takes still more time. And the rich countries are going to get these vaccines and treatments first. So this is going to disproportionately affect the poor countries of the world, the refugee populations, and which are already weakened due to lack of food and lack of decent regular medical care and so forth. So that's, in terms of deaths, that's where you're going to see most of them, in my humble opinion, anyway. All right, so now let's move on to our guest from Italy, Hugo, where they are now basically in full lockdown, and Hugo will fill us in on what the restrictions are and what he's doing and what he has to do, because he's still an active professor, and he has students, and they got to try to keep things going. That's how he makes a living, and that's how they hopefully learn something. So Hugo, why don't you tell us what's going on with you in Florence, Firenze, and
Firenze, yeah. Well, what can I say? You probably read it in the newspaper, on the web, etc. The whole country is shut down. There is no movement, no people around, no university. Everything is closed. We do what we can virtual over the web. You see, it's not the same thing as teaching in class, but most people are just staying home. The government has ordered us to stay home. And that's very much the Chinese strategy, a little bit softer, not so strong, but it is the way the Chinese face the epidemic, and they succeeded. Actually, the data that we can see now appearing show that the epidemic is under control in China, whereas in Italy, unfortunately, is still growing nicely exponentially. It's going up like this, so we need... It's very bad. If it keeps like this, it will be a big trouble, because the health system is going to be, it is already in part overwhelmed. And there is a big problem here. You see, in Italy, a few decades ago, we had 10 beds, hospital beds, per 1,000 inhabitants. Now we have 3. And that's already a big problem. If you are over 60 or over 70, I'm 67 now, George, I'm a little younger than you maybe, but not so much. So I don't know what happens if I show up at a hospital coughing, and they're going to tell me, no, Mr. Bardi, you are too old, please go home and die, which might happen. It's all right. I mean, I'm fatalistic. I think, as George was saying, we are all going to get it, and we are going to. There's two things, different things. One, individually, you are going to get it, and you fight the best you can, which is fine. I'm not worried. Honestly, we will see. It's one of those things that doesn't depend on me. If I get it, I might die. I may survive. I think still my chances. Also yours, George, are not so bad. We can survive. Then there is a social problem that how to manage this in such a way that essentially everybody gets a chance to be treated, not just people who are under 60. Because I mean, why do you want to kill everybody over 60? I'm personally against that.
Well, that's the one of the Illuminati wet dreams, is useless eaters. Okay, get rid of the useless eaters, the poor, the old, the infirm.
One thing about this thing, I don't think any of those lessons are going to be learned from this. This is too small this is just aim. That's all we're going to get out of this, in my opinion.
So I am obeying the government, because trying to avoid spreading the disease, and in order to reduce the impact. Hopefully we can make it, but we're going to see. It's a very delicate moment. In the coming few days, we will see if we can stop the disease and start going down, just like China did, or if we cannot. If it keeps going up, it is going to be total disaster, because the Italian system cannot cope with such numbers. It's impossible. And this is, as George, we were discussing about that. You remember resilience versus efficiency. If the system is very efficient, it is not resilient. And if it is resilient, it cannot be very efficient. So in Italy, we have been trying to be very efficient, but we have a system which is not able to cope with a serious emergency. Just to give you some idea, in Germany, they have 8 beds per person, and this is more or less proportional. You don't really need beds, you need intensive care units, ICU, but it is more or less proportional. Still, Germany has 3 times more intensive care units than Italy. So in Germany they can afford to say, well, let them come in, so we can absorb the cases, have enough beds, intensive care units to deal with this wave of sick people which will go through the hospitals. And so they they're not doing the same as we are doing, because the Germans are rich and they can afford 8 beds per person. But not per person, per 1,000.
Per 1,000
people. Per 1,000 people. So that's the difference. And in England, I understand from the people I know who work there, the government just say, you will die. And that's what they're saying. Maybe they will change their mind. In France, because in England, Britain, more better said, I think they have 2.5 beds per 1,000 people, so they're worse off than us. And maybe they decided that we just cannot make it, so let's nature follow its course. And about the United States, I don't really know what's the idea. You know that you guys have only 2.8 beds per 1,000 people.
Let me give you a little story about what happened here in King County yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the full details, news story, saw it briefly. The county has bought a motel in the city of Kent, which is inside the county, to put homeless people in for quarantine, and they actually have their first patient. Well, the city of Kent has filed suit to close it down because they don't want it in their backyard.
Okay, very nice, very nice. Okay.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know that.
Share that little intelligence with you.
Well, we're going to see how we are going to do this in the States. It's going to be a big test. And it's not so simple as to count the number of beds. It's more complex than that. I'm not an expert in this. It depends how many intensive care units you have, how the healthcare system is organized. And the American healthcare system is excellent. It's very good if you can pay, as you know.
That's right.
So it's too easy for people like us who are not professionals to judge or to misjudge what a healthcare system can do or what cannot do. We have to see that. What I can do what I can tell you as a little note, as you said, is that I know one guy older than me. He got sick, very sick, and but he's much richer than me. So he took a private plane and flew to Switzerland, and he is now in a private clinic where he is treated.
Nothing
And
like a
then,
little money
as
to
usual,
grease the
if you
wheels.
can do this kind of things, life is easier, but it's not obvious that he will survive.
Well, yeah, it's money. Money does talk in the medical profession, and as far as I'm concerned, as I said, there's no coronavirus up here, but I am affected because I was recently down in Seattle because I can't find surgeons up here who are willing to do the necessary operations on my legs to hopefully get me some better quality of life as I finish it out here. So I flew down to Seattle to see a surgeon down there who said, yeah, I think I can do this one. And so I flew out. Keith joked. He said, maybe they're not going to let you go home. And actually, I was worried about that. But I did fly back home. But now, talking to them on the phone, they have shut down all elective surgeries in Seattle. So I couldn't go there and get the operation even if I want to right now. And the last place I want to be with a disease running around is in a hospital. There's no better place to catch an infection than in a hospital. That's already happened to me last year. I was hospitalized once for acute anemia. I needed blood transfusions, and they had to work for about 3 or 4 days to get my blood chemistry back in balance.
What? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was really nasty. But then, even worse, I went home, and a week later, my legs blew up like footballs, okay? And I had caught an infection in my legs, and it was extraordinarily painful. I've never experienced pain like that in my life. The only thing that touched it was intravenous morphine. Okay, Percocets, none of the strongest oral medications, opioids, touched it. Didn't touch it. So I had to be on morphine drip. And at the real bad, hospital level, I guess, for them, what they call pain, and knocking down the infection. I was dosed heavily with antibiotics for 3 days in the hospital. And then they said, yeah, you're okay, you can go home. Okay. I'm still in serious pain. I couldn't even sleep in my bed. I was parked in my office chair. I slept in it, whatever, because I couldn't put my feet on the bed. I had to have my feet up, and my heels couldn't touch anything. They were so bad. And the only time I got out of the chair was to go to the bathroom, and that was hard. And I didn't even do that a lot of the time, only if I had to go number 2. If I had to pee, I had a piss jar right here, like in my trucking years, pee into. So I was 3 months like that. It was horrible. I wanted to die. Okay, anyway. So we know that the disease is spreading. We know that this is going to get exponentially worse with time. And, I don't think the German healthcare system is going to be able to handle it once the disease migrates to Germany. I think they'll all be overwhelmed in terms of the number of cases that need ICU beds and so forth. And then you will have the discrimination and dichotomy between the rich and the poor who gets treatment, and between the old and the young, and so forth. And there will be triage, okay? And some of it's economic triage, and some of it is age-related and, health-related otherwise. If you were in bad health to begin with.
Hard to see what's going to happen. I just, before we started this, I ran across a factoid. In Canada, right now, there are only 137 diagnosed cases. Justin Trudeau's wife has come up as positive. Well, if you do the math, that's by random chance. That's 1 in 255,000 something. So, she gets out more, her odds were higher, but it tells me that we don't know what the heck's going on, is what it really tells me, because that's such a, how could random chance, So that tells me that the German healthcare system, and we just don't know what we're up against, and we're behind the curve, and that's what's causing the exponential growth in all the Western countries, United States, Italy, everywhere, where it's a different story in the Eastern countries, different government, and so that's what I think. It's just going to keep going, and we don't know how fast or what it's going to bring.
Well, let's, we talked about the healthcare system and how that's coping or not coping with the problem. Let's move on a little here to the economic end and the economic effects that are already showing up. We have, in New York City, they've shut down all Broadway productions, all sporting events, etc. Now you have, thousands, tens of thousands of people who work in all of these venues, and then the restaurant business and so forth, very big in New York. Tourist business, very big in Italy as well. Lots of people depend on their incomes from this. These are many of these people live paycheck to paycheck. Okay, so how do you think this is going to be dealt with? As many people can't make rent because their jobs just aren't there right now. 2 weeks down the line, with everything shut down, how long can the tourist business and tourist workers in Florence survive? Hugo, you want to talk about that a little bit to start with?
Well, maybe I can. Yes, it's a big trouble. I can give you some numbers, and Italy's GDP is made of tourism for 13%, which is huge. And right now, this 13% of the GDP is lost zero, absolutely zero. So in a city like Florence, I don't have such data, but from some estimates, I can make myself the GDP, the fraction of the GDP gross town product, which depends on tourism in Florence, may be around 30-40%, which is very large. So this is a very big, but not a problem. It's something that's happening. I mean, you call it problem, but people should have known. I mean, you realize that any disruption of the global economy can destroy the flux of tourists to Florence and to Italy. Takes very little.
Mm-hmm.
It had to happen. It's happening now, and we are losing for at least 1 year 13% of our gross national product, which is gigantic. If you think that people are worried when we lose 0.1%, 0.5% is a disaster, 1% is national breakdown, but we are going to lose all of a sudden 13% of our GDP, which is, I mean, it's beyond my capabilities of understanding. We will have to rethink everything, what we do, why we do things, how to manage an economy that suddenly shrinks out of some 30 or 50, I think $50 billion per year brought to Italy by the tourists. And we will survive, I think, but it's going to be hard to physically survive for many people. Because right now in Florence, it's panic, really. Because a lot of people would work in the hotel industry, the restaurants, the travel agency, taking people in town, tourist guides, with little flags and selling things to tourists. And suddenly all the activities which are related to that are lost. I have a friend who lives by giving English lessons to Italians. I mean, not to tourists, but the Italians are not coming anymore to listen. Why should they spend money to take English lessons? What are they going to use them for when there are no more tourists?
Right.
You see? And so it is going to be very, very interesting. Right now, the government is trying to at least keep people alive because, for instance, by government decree, you don't have to pay your mortgage this month. For a few months, you don't need to pay your mortgage. But think, when will you be able to restart paying your mortgage? And the people, what are the banks going to do? Are they going to take your home or not? Or what are they going to do? In any case, in my opinion, I think this 13% is not just lost for a few months. It is not lost for 1 year. It is lost forever. Because most of this 13% of the budget is international tourism coming here by plane. And my impression is that the airplane industry, they will not survive this crisis. They're going to crash and never recover again.
Yeah, along with the cruise ship industry. And,
Boeing's gonna hurt.
the issue then with all of these people losing their incomes is you have yet another system, another level, and I'm going to ask George to speak to this a little bit, is the fact that the income taxes, the taxes that the government receives from all those people who no longer have jobs, they're not getting that revenue. So now the tax base and the tax situation has had a huge drop off. So how can the government continue to fund even the 3 beds in Italy per 1,000 people when they're not getting the money in taxes? So you have this knock-on effect, yet another level. George, you want to talk about that in terms of system science and how these various things affect one another?
I could. I mean, we've touched on a few knock-on effects, and Hugo could build a system dynamic model of all the different influences that are going on and project. But I mean, Meadows and et al. Did that a long time ago, and we're dead on right about most of it. What I would really like to talk about is I have been characterized as a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist, because actually, even though I might be affected, personally, I see this as an opportunity to kick out this consumerist, capitalist, and I'm going to say democracy, pseudo-democracy system that we've been living under, and start afresh. There will be survivors. There will be lots of survivors, and that I don't think is a problem. What I think is a problem is, do they learn from this experience? This system was unprepared to deal with this kind of problem. Our population density is way too high. The personal mobility is way too high, and so on and so forth. So basically, there are a lot of factors. They're all tied together. The dynamics of the whole system is one of we're at the cliff. We're going over the cliff, and the economy simply will not be able to recover. We don't have the energy sources to build it back up again. There's nothing that's going to come on in the short run that's going to be able to actually support that. So what does it mean? I think it means, in the long run, human society will be a lot more like what I think it should be. And I actually have finished a chapter in my new book on what that looks like. So I think this is an opportunity, as opposed to just simply being, I think Hugo, you said earlier, it's not a problem. It's a situation that we have. But in the long run, it could be an opportunity. And the key question I have is, are people going to learn from this experience? Are they ultimately going to be able to put all these pieces together and see how this particular system that we have now is actually the cause of the problems that we're facing? So, I don't get hung up on details about things like taxes or anything like that, Ari. I'm mostly trying to go up as high as I can and look down on the situation.
Big picture.
What are the pieces and how are they interacting?
Right.
And where does it go over time?
Right. And then the question is, when you say over time and short term versus long term, what's the timeline? What is short term? Is that 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? And what is long term? Is that 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, and so forth? How long does it take for society survivors to reinvent the way we live? And at that time, and I'm an optimist in that sense too. I believe that Homo sapiens is going to survive all of this stuff. Climate change, all the rest of it. Putting numbers on that, number of survivors on it is another story entirely, and it's difficult to say. You're going to have a certain number of dead people from the virus almost directly. Okay, getting the disease, getting pneumonia, and not having decent medical care, and having compromised immune system, and they're going to die. Okay. Right now, I think the mortality rate is something like 3%, which, if everybody in the world gets it...
That's on the low side.
Yeah, okay, yeah, it's on the low side. But let's go with that. If everybody in the world gets it, and there's 7.5 billion people, then, you're talking 225 million, something like that. Multiply it out. And... that's a lot of dead people, but we'll survive. But that's not the only dead people that you're going to get. You're also going to have people you're going to have political revolutions of one sort or another that are going to come out of this. You know, you're going to have a lot of unhappy people as the governments prove inept at handling it. People are going to get more and more frustrated. There's going to be more and more problems with just-in-time delivery and so forth. Food is going to become less available. As a result, people will die of starvation, which is another knock-on effect. So, you know, Keith, you want to speak to some of those political ends or aspects that you see, and what kind of actions, because I know you're action-oriented, you think might be effective in the near term and in the long term?
Well, I'm pessimistic, and I'm going to kind of dissent maybe with all this, because I don't think where the lessons of the Enlightenment going to come from. I mean, all of us are. Hey, we all each have our own blog. There are 4 bloggers here. We try. We're trying to get a message out. We're trying to enlighten people. Make them aware of reality. But we've been at this for a little while, and we're not exactly bringing in the big numbers. Hollywood's still winning hands down in distractions, and I'm just, there are times in the past. I recently learned that there was a big earthquake in Lisbon a few hundred years ago, and it actually caused people to change some philosophical investigations and writings and so on, and attitudes in society changed. I don't know that, even 5% of people being cleaned out, not maybe a nice way to put it, but, they're gone, right? 5%? That's not, I don't know that that's going to just do any more than cause a lot of hurt and pain. One thing that happened when Trump was elected, there were a lot of young people that said, oh, this is great. Well, he'll really mess it up, and then the forces will rally, and then we'll have real change. Let him mess it up, and then we'll fix it. Well, that doesn't work out. It just gets more messed up. So I'm just really afraid of where this is going. I wish I could agree that this is a great opportunity, and I don't deny it's an opportunity, because that's what else can we do but try to use it that way. But my big thing with objection to George is I just don't see where the Enlightenment is coming from. I like being enlightened. I'm getting more enlightened all the time. It's a wonderful journey, but it's a big world out there. So, next.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. All right, I'm gonna try to straddle the fence here. It is hard to see where enlightenment will come from, but one of the things about the human race and about people is that in times of real trouble, there are people that stand up, that rise from the crowd and become leaders and change things. I could go into history. You have Gandhi, for instance, who completely changed the mindset in India about how to deal with British imperialism, and go back further than that, and you've got people like Joan of Arc, okay, who 16-year-old girl led France to victory, and today you have Greta Thunberg, a young Swedish girl. So there are people that are out there that can rise and become leaders and help to make the changes that we're going to need to make. But on the other hand, the level of pain that we're going to experience as a society, and the total level of death, and as I say, not just from the virus itself, but from all of these other knock-on effects, is going to be extreme. And at least in this country, and pretty much in Italy too. The politicians, they're utterly confused. They have no plan at all. They're reactive, not proactive, and then we have a POTUS who is, completely inept and really just self-serving in so many ways, and a liar, and misogynist, and narcissist, and megalomaniac, and just he goes through the whole DSM-5 in terms of psychiatric disorders. But the leaders in all the rest of the countries, they're not too good either. So these political systems are going to have to be radically changed, and the people running these things removed from power, one way or the other.
Wonder if I could address Keith's point there, and the reason I am optimistic is we have to look at this in an entirely new way, as opposed to sort of just historical precedents for whether enlightenment comes about or not. We're talking about a global phenomenon. In the case that you mentioned, Keith, you're talking about a local phenomenon. And the problem with that is it's like the fall of the Roman Empire or any of the other civilizations that have collapsed and so forth. There's always out there that can eventually fill in. No matter what you might have learned or insights you might have gotten, there's always these other cultures that can kind of fill the void eventually. So we've never had a case where the whole world is affected pretty much simultaneously. And so that's what I'm thinking is going to be a major difference between what we've seen in the past as cataclysms that happen here or happen there and so forth, that could then be filled in by non-affected peoples.
Well, I hope you're right. I want you to be right.
Yeah, that's it. Hope, right? Hope, right.
Hope is eternal.
But I think that is a major. I'm working with a team right now on a process that I call ontogenesis, which is basically where do systems come from? How do systems come into being? And it's part of a larger tradition of major transitions in physical evolution and biological evolution and cultural evolution. And what we're trying to do is ascertain what principles we may be exploring have to do with the future of humankind. Now, I never thought necessarily in terms of a pandemic being the trigger point, but I'm seeing, I think we've accumulated a lot of evidence for pressure building up for humanity to reorganize itself, if it's going to survive at all, to reorganize itself into a society that is far more in tune with the rest of the Earth system, what I call the ecos. And so I think this might be it. This might be the triggering event, because all those knock-on effects, such as the things that Ari was talking about, there's going to be many, many more people subject to hardships and probably death as a result of the breakdown of the economic system. And that being the case, there's going to be a lot more isolated pockets of people who are the survivors, who are then going to go through the normal evolutionary process of, trying this, trying that, and whoever kind of gets it right, that's going to survive. The system we have now survived was the fittest only because we kept increasing the amount of energy that was available to do useful work. That's it. It wasn't just our cleverness, our inventiveness, and so forth. It was the availability of energy to support all that, and that's going away. So I think those people will start over. They'll have to invent new social organizations. I suspect they're going to revert to ancient tribalism, and hopefully they'll revert to those tribes being guided by the wise elders as opposed to the entrepreneurs. So we'll see. No, we won't see.
Right.
But the world.
We'll see things.
Yeah.
Right,
We're
gentlemen, would you allow me to say bye-bye to you?
Yeah, no, you go, don't
this
say,
is dinner time.
don't
Yeah.
say bye-bye, because I was just about to wrap it up. All right? And so we can all wrap it up together. So, we've presented a lot of questions here about what's going to happen, what the future might be or might not be, and I would like to have done a lot more, but we've already had a very long conversation, and I don't know how many people sit through the whole thing to listen to it, but I hope a few of you will. And I do want to thank my friends Keith and George and Hugo for coming on here today to talk about the problems that we face with coronavirus, which are going to increase. I mean, it's not a question now that it's going to increase. And then how society will handle it. And how will you handle it personally? What will you do to ensure your own survival and that of your family and friends? Okay? And that's all to do. This time until next time. Here on the Collapse Cafe of the Doomstead Diner. Hasta la pizza and spaghetti and meatballs.
Bye, everybody. See you.
All right, later, everybody.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye, Hugo.
Pleasure. Next time.
Yeah, we'll do it
Okay.
again. We'll do it again.
Bye. Have a nice day. Okay.
See ya, Hugo.
All right, guys, that's a wrap.